My guy is not a talker, so I send him lots of letters and text messages, but then he doesn't reply and goes silent for days. What's up with that? Okay. So I responded to this question actually in a 1 minute short or reel, and it kind of ruffled a few feathers, my response. So I thought I would delve more deeply into this. Sometimes it can be helpful to write our thoughts down in order to organize them, but with avoidant partners, I might recommend just using that exercise to kind of organize your own thoughts and do your own processing in advance, and then communicate with them in a different, more considered way. Because, letters and text messages, they're going to be difficult for an avoidant partner to absorb and take in because it's just more and more and more words, and they're going to feel overwhelmed by that. And they are not going to feel very capable of responding in the same way. So when we have a tendency to kind of over-articulate, it can scare them off because it communicates to them that you need them to communicate back with a lot of words. And they're not going to feel like they're capable of doing that. So that means that we have to focus on full energetic and emotional presence, body-to-body communication, instead of evaluating behavior and outcomes with a lot of heady verbal content, which is not always what the real issue is about anyway. So this can be a challenge because our culture teaches us that verbal communication is the only way to connect, but it isn't, and it's not necessarily the best way. Okay. So within that, I want to explain a few things in greater detail because I responded that way and a few people said, oh, well, now that means I just have to learn how to communicate the way a avoidant partner does, and I never get to be seen, heard, or understood, and now that means I can't communicate. Okay. So first, I want to clarify that using a lot of verbal communication and transcribing lengthy text messages and letters is what I refer to as over-articulation. And I say that because this is more than just using words to express yourself. It's a trauma response. Okay. Secondly, in an avoidant or even a fearful avoidant partner, the onslaught of verbal articulation can also inspire a freeze response, which means they become emotionally flooded. And that is a trauma response, right? So we're using all these words because we're emotionally flooded. And so we're expelling the flood that way, and they take it in. So you're both kind of experiencing the same thing. And now everybody's triggered, right? Third, communicating non-verbally isn't just about memorizing strategies and body language. Okay, it's a lot more than that. And it speaks to our energetic exchanges in relationship. So in this particular segment, I want to delve into each of these topics in a little bit more detail so that we can improve the way that we're communicating with each other and start to heal some of these more reactive and triggered responses that lead to that kind of downward spiral, okay, on both sides. So I want to go back to the beginning. Sometimes over-articulation is a trauma response. So when we have not felt loved or valued or seen for who we really are, there's a need for that acknowledgement inside of us. And that need, that desire, it grows and it grows and it grows, okay? And it gathers a lot of mental, emotional, and energetic momentum inside of us. And it becomes somewhat of a vacuum, a powerful demand. And so the velocity or the intensity of that energy, it has to find some way to express itself. It has to find some way to release itself. It has to find a filter or a mechanism through which it can kind of burn off some of that velocity, some of that intensity. So when we lean towards being more verbose, this is the chosen filter, okay? And it's an effective one for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that verbal articulation is praised and rewarded in our society, right? But if those words are fueled by this intense need, we start to use our words as a means of filling up the space between ourselves, between someone else, filling up the vacuum inside to kind of avoid that fear of abandonment and to remain connected to them by controlling the narrative. Also, words can carry with it a lot of details and surface level information and content that when we become preoccupied with that keeps us distracted from really naming and claiming what is going on beneath all of that surface level detail, emotionally and energetically speaking. Okay. So if we can write a really good story about how all the details of past experiences or offenses tie together to make your case, and you can justify it with evidence, then it might feel as though you have a more righteous position in the relationship power struggle, and no one can argue with you, right? And that's a safer place to be because you're more in control. Additionally, if it was unsafe to feel your feelings in the past, and therefore the body itself was an unsafe place to be because that's where your feelings were, then a lot of your energy and a sense of self and identity might have just leapt up to the head, or kind of dissociatively floats up and hangs around just above your head. And so your verbal articulation indicates a very cerebral way of moving through the world and expressing that energy, which can affect a disconnection from the heart, even as you are trying to use your words to establish a connection there. So this is when we slip, when that means the heart may fall into imbalance, which means it starts to express its shadow aspects, which are things like grief and codependency, right? Inauthenticity and self-expression, walking on eggshells, things like that. Worried about upsetting someone else. And so you're allowing them to hide from you. And so you start hiding yourself from them just to stay close to them, but nobody actually feels intimate, right? It's because the heart has been cut off. Now, the second part of this, add in this partner who's less verbally articulate, or maybe even leans towards reticence, stonewalling, silence, and shutdown, right? So for them, they too have a desire to be seen and understood, but it was unsafe for them to express the intensity of that need outwardly. They were not able to cultivate a coping skill by which they could communicate themselves or control the narrative in that way. So what happens is they turn it inwardly, they turn it in on the self. And when we do that, it creates a very tight, constricted kind of energy. They get it all knotted up inside, and it doesn't go away. It just becomes increasingly dense and condensed over time. And oftentimes this can lead to things like depression, right? Internalized pressure. And so the more velocity and intensity that need, because they still have the need at the core of that knot, right? It's all tangled up, but they still have that need too at the core of that. So the velocity and the intensity of that need, it still snowballs and acquires over time. And if they don't learn new ways to process it, the more rigid they become in their thinking and in their self-expression over time. And the more they're going to withdraw in order to stay safe and maintain that fragile balance. So internally, this can express itself through things like compulsivity, attitudinal inflexibility, cynicism, negative automatic thinking, catastrophizing, being controlling about their environments, overly routined, and so on. And so asking for that verbal connection or that articulation around feelings may feel like to them that you're trying to detangle the knot. But their identity in many ways has been built around that knot. And more than that, really their fundamental sense of emotional, and I would argue, existential safety. So the protective part of them is not going to like that kind of poking and prodding and provocation. It's going to bring up fears of failure, anger that you don't accept them for exactly who they are, defensiveness, feeling invaded upon, smothered, or feelings of helplessness because they sense that they're not capable of giving you what you need. And so in a relationship, this could demonstrate itself like things that we call stonewalling, obstinance, or resistance, but really it's a preservation of a fragile state of inner emotional and energetic balance. Okay. But I would argue that for both parties involved, this is a really great opportunity. And that's why I say that these anxious avoidant trap relationships are soulfully catalytic. So for the more verbose individual, this is going to challenge them to slow down, to get out of their heads and to drop down into their heart and into their bodies so that they learn to churn their energy in a more heart-centered way and let go of a need to control the narrative long enough to discern if a partner really is going to show up for them. If they were to stop initiating everything and anxiously filling up the space between them. Now, for our more reticent individual, this is a chance to start detangling that knot and practice inviting other people into their lives to participate in their inner emotional life and experience. It's about loosening, softening, relaxing, becoming more flexible, resilient, and personally empowered so that their fragility can evolve into a sensitivity that actually serves the people that they love and their relationships rather than cuts them off from connection. And so that really brings us to the third point that I want to make here. So I mentioned that we needed to find other ways of communicating. And this particular inquiry was specific to like text messages and letters. First off, I want to say, stop long ass text messages. Don't do it. Don't have important, meaningful, emotional conversations over text message. Do not do it. I know that we're in a new generation and we've got these adults now that have lived their whole lives with access to things like cell phones and the internet. And I might be dating myself here by saying that, I didn't have a cell phone until I was 23 and resisted smartphones until I had my first child. And I remember the days when you couldn't expect an immediate response from someone because you had to wait until they went home and listen to the messages on their answering machine, right? I mean, and then you might not even respect a response that day because you knew they'd get home after work at 5 or 6, have dinner with their family, do their nighttime routines and go to bed. They might be too tired. They may not even contact you until the next day. So there's this culture that we have around instant gratification and immediate response and connection. And so I am a big believer in reducing the amount of text messaging that goes on in intimate relationships. It is only used for flirtiness and breeziness and sharing funny things, setting up a time to meet together, setting up a time to talk on the phone, not lengthy, important conversations. Just don't do it. Okay. So I just want to give you that preface first. I have that bias. So what do I mean when I say nonverbal way of exchanging energy, nonverbal ways of communicating? So as I said, for many, many people, when I say that, body language probably comes to mind. But body language is really an after effect, okay? It's how the body translates the energy that's moving through your body in any given moment. Relaxed, receptive, socially inviting body language might look like open posture, uncrossed arms and legs. You appear to be inviting interaction or conversation. Maybe there's a gentle smile that reaches your eyes and it signals some warmth and openness and receptivity. Leaning towards someone during a conversation shows interest and engagement. Nodding or giving small affirmative gestures as somebody's talking indicates understanding and engagement and interest. If you can maintain comfortable eye contact, not unbreaking eye contact, because that sometimes feels invasive, but contact that you maintain and then naturally breaks and then reconnects. This tends to establish a sense of connection without that sense of intimidation, right? So these are ways that the body indicates what is the emotional, energetic experience going on inside of you, right? On the other hand, if we have rigid, closed off, or antisocial body language, that's going to look like always having your arms or your legs crossed. It feels as if you're creating a barrier between you. Sometimes it can suggest things like defensiveness or discomfort. When you avoid eye contact, you can't make any eye contact, or on the other hand, you're making excessive eye contact. It can feel confrontational, or it can feel like you're not paying attention to them, right? If your face is not expressive, if it's very deadpan, right? Or there's minimal facial expression, sometimes it appears as if you're aloof, you're disinterested, you're detached. It can make someone appear kind of unapproachable, right? If we instead of leaning forward, if we turn our bodies away or we lean back, it may signal a lack of interest or a desire to disengage. And if we're constantly fidgeting excessively, or we appear restless, or we're always checking our phone, then that indicates distraction, discomfort, impatience, right? Disinterest, things like that. So it can be helpful to understand those as subtle cues of body language that can enhance our nonverbal communication and relationships and clue us into what is the emotional energy going on here. But again, these are just the visible signs of that inner energetic and emotional experience that's going on. So you can strategize and practice shifting body posture intentionally in different ways. And it's true that sometimes moving your body in a different way can shift an energy or a mood state. But when we're in just regular everyday conversation, the way our bodies respond is typically largely unconscious. So what does that mean? So that means that you want to be proactively connecting to your energy, to your core self, with ritualistic or daily practices. So this could look like meditation, guided visualization. Maybe you want to script your day. Maybe you do tapping exercises. Maybe you do things like yoga or other ways of connecting to your body and the way that energy moves through it. Maybe you're an artist like me and using creative activities helps center you into the body. But you want to be connecting to that core sense of self and your transcendental energy so that you internalize and habitualize and make unconscious a mechanism of churning energy effectively so that when you enter into a distress situation, your body's communicating all those relaxed, receptive, and open to engage cues. So you're not just responding to what the other person says or does. Instead, you're setting the tone. You are setting the tone. And so you're shifting the vibrational frequency between you to a more connected and harmonious wavelength. So before we wrap up this discussion, I want to just give you an example of a couple that spirals because they're not able to do this. And so each one is looking to the other person to set the tone of the relationship and create the emotional safety that they want and need. But as a result, they both create an unsafe situation. So this is a quote from someone who shared their experience in the comments of my YouTube channel. I have aspects of dismissive avoidant attachment style. My problem is that my girlfriend is more anxious, leaning towards fearful, avoidant, or disorganized. When I need to pull back, her abandonment fears are triggered. Her emotional mood swings flood me and completely derail me. So she can escalate so quickly that I cannot gather my thoughts well enough to respond in the moment. I find that I fumble with my words, and then it only makes things worse. I have to step away and decompress so as not to worsen the situation, but then that only makes her more upset. I'm trying to be present and supportive, but then she tells me that I'm not being that way because I don't agree with why she's upset, or I'm not soothing her to the extent that she desires. So she thinks that I'm the villain or that I don't have her back when truly I'm just in self-protection mode. So you can let me know in the comments, does any of this sound familiar? Have you ever found yourself caught in a spiral like that? I'd love to know that. And I would just draw your attention to how neither one of these individuals feels emotionally safe because in this circumstance, they are relying on the other person to create that safety first. But what if you could establish ways of regulating your emotional safety and equilibrium internally so that you are responding to what the person is sharing without taking on their emotional energy or narratives? Okay, so for example, let's break this down a little bit. She can escalate so quickly that I cannot gather my thoughts well enough to respond in the moment. I find that I fumble with my words and it only makes things worse. So this tells me that he's unconsciously taking on her energy and has not learned to create adequate energetic boundaries between them so that when she emotionally escalates, he can be the rock and she can be the wave. Right now, he's getting pulled under the current. The next thing he says, I have to step away and decompress so as not to worsen the situation, but then that only makes her more upset. So this tells me that she's projecting some of her past wounds, traumas, and narratives onto him, and in that moment has probably lost sight of who he really is. And so his emotional turmoil is not being equally considered in this conflict because she's chasing him down. And she's also lost a sense of her personal boundaries and has switched into fight mode. So that means chasing him down because she believes it's going to help her find safety by forcing him to connect with her. But of course, that's only going to make him feel attacked, like the pincushion. So he switches into flight mode, right? And so now he's going to flee to find safety. So they're both vibing at the same frequency, but it's a fearful one. And they each embody opposite ways of coping with that circumstance. He says, I'm trying to be present and supportive, but then she tells me that I'm not being that way because I don't agree with why why she's upset, or I'm not soothing her to the extent that she desires. Okay. So here it's important to realize that being present and supportive does not require agreeing with why somebody's upset. Upset feelings don't have to be justified. They typically express an unmet need or an emotional wound that you will want to acknowledge. And so a more supportive approach is just to be curious and accept that it's here, it's alive, and it's expressing itself, rather than trying to move away from the discomfort by fixing it right away or needing to understand it before we will offer empathy. So it is possible, right? So it's more important in this situation to be accepting and empathic than it is to understand, because you may never understand, but you can be fully present and available. Now, to the second part, it is possible that he will never be able to soothe her to the extent that she desires, because while he can help her with maybe 40% of this wound by showing up in the ways that I just suggested, the other 60% of this is actually an internalized insecure narrative, which became a synaptic groove in her brain and in her nervous system that was planted in her unconscious mind and body probably years ago. And so addressing that part of this spiraling pattern is her responsibility, because it is a need that he will never be able to fill for her. But we are not intended to do this alone, right? There's a myth that we have to do this. I have to go heal myself on my own first before I can welcome in a loving relationship. No, because human relationships are fundamental to our health and well-being. So you don't need to do this on your own. So when I say it's her responsibility to take care of that part of herself, it's about reparenting her inner child and seeking out the appropriate people to support her in that way, because it's not our responsibility to become a partner's therapist. That's a trained therapist's responsibility, right? We don't want to turn our partners into our therapists or expect them to somehow make up for the offenses of our parents. It is okay to give ourselves permission to love each other in adult relationships in the way that children do, because there's sort of an unabashed quality to that, right? There's an innocent quality to that. And when we address in earnest the work that we need to do to reparent ourselves, then what happens is we do show up to these adult relationships with a childlike playfulness and with a childlike openness and with a childlike generosity towards each other. So again, he needs to show up 40 to 50%, creating that safe container and space for her. But there's a large part of this which she also has to be responsible for. And the same thing goes for him. He needs to stop trying to understand or fix in order to soothe. And he also needs to learn how to be fully present when someone's having a big feeling, which means it's not about learning how to be comfortable with her big feelings. It's about learning how to be comfortable with his own big feelings, so that when she has a big feeling, he has resilience in that moment and can be present with her. So the ways in which they could both assume better boundaries with and their respective emotional responsibility might sound like, I see this is really affecting you. How can we make it safe to talk about what's going on? I feel a growing distance between us in this moment. What type of connection would feel good right now? I may not feel the same way about that specific thing, but I do understand that it's important to you, which makes it important to me. So let's figure this out together. I see you're having a big feeling, and a big feeling is growing inside of me in response to that. I want to stick this out with you, but it is proving difficult. Can you hold my hand and just be with me here together and give me a moment while I collect myself so we can continue? Let me know if any of this is resonating with you, or if anything kind of stands out in your experience. I'd love to know that, in the chat or in the comments there. And I want to just offer maybe some summarizing or final thoughts. So in response to our question about a partner who's not a talker, it's really important to recognize that the dynamics of over-articulation and then of the sort of silent withdrawal exhibit a degree of trauma response. So this involves using words excessively to fill a void or maintain control. And that behavior can overwhelm our more silent partner. In this case, it's a more avoidant partner who may respond with a freeze response or freeze reaction because they're emotionally flooded. So here, the key really lies in understanding that communication is not solely about words, that words is just a tool of communication, And that nonverbal communication, things like body language, indicate what is the energy exchange going on here, right? That plays a significant role. And it's not just about memorizing, body language strategies. It's about engaging in these practices proactively that's going to keep you in touch with your inner core and resilience so that you can effectively manage an energy exchange when a distressing situation pops up, right? And so engaging in this way is going to offer a more balanced approach and can lead to those more healthier and connected dynamics. And I will add to this, don't try to do this over text message. So I'd love to know what you think about these topics and how this is coming across to you. Would love to see that in the chat. And if you have questions, please, I would invite you to type them in there.
Also, remember to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. I put out videos once a week and I wouldn't want you to miss out.